Hi everyone, we're going to resume our weekly lectures. So this week we're going to talk about feeding healthy cats and healthy dogs. So this is week 11 and 12 in your feline and canine and feline companion animal course, nutrition course, and thank you for joining me again. When we talk about selecting a pet food, there are a lot of factors that we want to consider. The first one, and maybe the most easy to understand, is the pet's stage of life. Are they growing? Are they maintenance? Are they older? What's going on with their current stage? And then, of course, the lifestyle. Are they very active? Are they hardly active at all? And there's a huge range there. So, for example, you could be a dog who runs 2 or 3 times a week with your owner, and they run 3 to 4 miles each time. That's pretty active for a dog if you tag that on to regular walks. Or you could be a dog who has a marathon runner, and you as a dog run with them 4, 5, 6 times a week and go 6 to 7 miles each time. It's a huge change in the lifestyle of that animal. Or you could be a dog who barely goes out in the backyard or doesn't even have a backyard, and so the lifestyle is just very different. And it doesn't make one necessarily better or worse, it just means that we have to feed appropriately for whatever that lifestyle is. We've talked a lot about point 2 on here already. So you see here the feed nutrient content and the bioavailability of those nutrients. So we know that there are different nutrients that both cats and dogs need in order to maintain life. And you know that those nutrients can be in foods in many different sources. And some of those sources the body can use better than others. And we've talked about that quite a bit earlier in the course. But that's something very important to know. This also helps you understand the quality of a food, because one thing is more bioavailable than another. It's often more expensive. So that's, again, a factor to consider as you're trying to pick a food or recommend a food for someone. Number 3, we sometimes as scientists we often overlook this one, and it's a big mistake, whether it's in my career as a zoo nutritionist or whether it's as a companion animal nutritionist. We have to make sure that the food tastes good enough that the animal will eat it. And palatability, I should make sure I say, is much more than taste. Palatability is the whole eating experience. So for a dog, maybe it tastes really good, but it smells awful to them, then it's going to be less palatable. My example I often give in a different course is that if you love steak, but we gave you steak tasting rocks, you're still not going to eat it because it's going to hurt when you do it. So palatability is the whole experience. It's the texture, it's the taste, it's the smell, it's whatever's in there. So of course that leads to acceptance. How quickly is the animal going to eat it? Sometimes maybe too quickly, depending on the dog, or the cat. This may even be a bigger idea in our cats and in our elderly or sick animals who may have issues. The 4th one, we've talked a bit about this already this semester, but the effect on gastrointestinal functioning. So, how quick do they poop after they eat? How much gas do they have after they eat? Do these things matter to you? Do you think that the gas makes the dog uncomfortable? Is the poop making the dog uncomfortable? Is the poop able to express the anal glands appropriately as it should? Is it easy to bag? Is it making a mess and you can't clean it up, and therefore it's leading to parasites? So a lot of stuff going on with this one. I should say proper large intestine functioning, so that we're not worried about just any illness happening as well. Our next one is the caloric density. How many calories do you need for your animal for it to be alive and well? And that differs widely, of course, by that number 1, the stage in life, the lifestyle, and even some across the other ones. Diet digestibility. That, I do believe that one's heavily linked to the bioavailability up here. So they're kind of the same thing. It's just so what's bioavailable to the animal and what is able to be digested by the animal and absorbed. So with here, we're looking at, kind of species differences. Can the cat digest the same things that the dog can? Thinking about, say, carbs and the dog having more amylase than the cat does, so you're able to digest the carbs a little bit easier for the dog, and then of course that means that it's more bioavailable when it gets into the small intestines. So those two are heavily linked. Your text does define them in different categories, but for me that they are heavily linked. The last one is a little bit more forward thinking, long-term feeding. So oftentimes we think about, is my diet okay right now? And that's fine, but think about your dog who may, like I have a little Westie, he may live to be 18. So I need to think about, is what I'm feeding him good today, and will it still lead him to be a healthy dog when he's 17 years old? 14 years from now, what is this diet setting him up to be successful as a geriatric dog as well? And so that's long-term effects on body condition, the skin, the coat, health, vitality, disease. So old school, for example, there used to be a lot more chemicals in our dog and cat food, or colorings. We now know that some of those things could eventually cause cancer in animals. If our dogs are living 16 years and eating the same food every day, and they have something in it that is potentially cancer causing, then that's not promoting long-term feeding. So luckily, even the worst of the worst diets that we think about now are much, I hate to say better, but we know more now, so that we use things that we think are safer for our animals. And could some foods be better? Of course. Are we still learning? Yes, some things that we think safe today, we might find out are less safe tomorrow, but still, we should think about long term, not just, is the dog happy today? Is the dog going to be happy next year or the next year? There are different types of feeding regimens that we have for our animals, and again, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but here we go again. There's free choice, time controlled, and portion controlled. Free choice is that there's a surplus amount of food, the food is fed ad lib, and you're relying on your animal's ability to self-regulate food intake. Certainly we do this with a lot of different dogs, a lot of different cats, many other species as well, and it relies on that animal stopping eating. That's okay for some animals. It's not okay for some others. If you do this with wet food, then it could be a potential bacteria concern because it's left out too long and the animal may not eat it. So typically it's a dry food issue, and it has to be a healthy weight-ish animal. So an animal that is kind of proven to be one that doesn't overeat. Time controlled is when you, again, give them a big old bowl of food and let them eat whatever they want, but you only give them the food for 15 minutes or 30 minutes. Some people that I know who work with animals, have dogs that are gulpers, they do it for 5 minutes. They put the food down, the dog gets excited, the cat is excited, they chow down, the owner walks away, gets a cup of coffee, whatever it is, comes back, takes the food, and then and that's it. They may do that one time. They may do it once a day, not usually recommended. Usually it's twice a day, but some owners even do it 3 or 4 times a day. The trouble with doing it 3 or 4 times a day is that you might not be able to mimic that behavior every day. So if you go to the state fair, are you going to miss 2 feedings instead of 1? Or how is that setting up your animal to be a little more stressed out? But regardless, that's time controlled. So the owner sets the time. They don't deviate from the time. It's always 5, always 10, always 15. And the animal kind of comes to learn they have to eat what they want in a certain period of time. Portion controlled is that you have measured out what you want the animal to eat, and you feed it to them throughout the day. So it could be 1 meal a day again, 2 meal, kind of the same idea I just talked about, but you have measured out how much you think your animal needs on a caloric basis, and maybe you put it in little baggies, and that way if you want your 5-year-old to help you feed, then it's in a baggie, and they're able to dump that baggie in the food's bowl, and then maybe you pre-labeled them, morning and evening all week, and they're in the little baggies, and there you go. And ideally, if you're portion controlling, you should be weighing that. It shouldn't be a cup or a spoonful or whatever, because everybody's cup can be different. Some people do rounded cups, some people do under cups, some people, I really recommend, if you want to do portion controlled, that you have a little scale there and you use the scale and you do a real portion control, not an estimated amount. And that enables the owner to know a little bit more about what's happening with the animal. They know exactly how much food is going in, exactly how many calories are going in, and they can watch the dog's behavior with that. So it's a heavily recommended method of feeding. It is one that I personally think people fail at more because they don't measure it out as much as they should, and or they're not consistent with it. But it's a great way to learn more about your dog's true eating behavior, their true caloric intake and needs, and to be able to monitor it. I will say that time controlled, if you have lots of animals eating at the same time, that can be a challenge to control, separating the animals of behavior. And portion controlled, again, you may have to separate some individuals for that, so that they can be a little bit more troublesome for the owner, and that's the reason some go back to number one, or the free choice. And again, free choice does certainly allow animals to sometimes be overweight. Our next one here, nutrient requirements. This is for growth. So again, thinking about your animal and thinking about what they need extra as they're growing is pretty important. And so, of course, energy. The energy requirement for growth exceeds any other stage of life other than lactation. Sometimes the very end of pregnancy also exceeds it, but because pregnancy is so short in the animal, it's not usually, and it doesn't usually do it. But long story short, they need a lot of energy to grow compared to what they need to be maintained. But again, you should think about how much energy do they really need, and like, am I giving too much or am I giving too little? We often overfeed our animals because we want to err on the side of too much, which, that's okay sometimes, but doing that every day, all day, giving them too much energy means that you're giving them too much fat ultimately, because the energy is going to convert over. If it's not used, it's not used, and that's a waste for your pocketbook, and it's a waste for the animal that could actually impact their growth. Protein. So in addition to normal maintenance needs for young animals, they need more protein to build new tissue. And that's associated with the growth, of course. So we need to have high quality protein, and that means it should be highly digestible and then highly available. So it's not just about having lots of protein. It's about having lots of the particular amino acids that those animals need in order for them to put down that muscle and that protein themselves. So it has to be a high quality for that species. So think about what are their limiting amino acids, what's limiting for that species, and how does that species digest it and absorb it. So we're talking cats and dogs here, so you need to think about with the cat, the arginine, the taurine, things that you don't think about with swine, for example, or with beef cattle. So there's a lot of important words in this when you start thinking about species examples. We talked a bit about calcium and phosphorus. We talked about how really fast-growing animals, we have to make sure that we give them enough calcium and phosphorus, but not too much, because some disease can develop there. But we do know that calcium and phosphorus, there's a minimum requirement of 1% calcium and 0.8% phosphorus for our growing dogs and cats. A little bit over that is okay. Too much over that can be a problem. Clearly too much under that can be a problem. So again, this is one of those cases where too much is not a good thing. So you have to actually know what the animal needs and get it that, not too much on either side. DHA, we've talked about your essential fatty acids. So prenatal, postnatal, we want to make sure that the animal is developing neurologically correctly, and that there's proper retinal development and all kinds of different things. But when you were a baby, probably, I can't remember exactly when DHA became popular in the human market, maybe when you guys were babies, maybe you guys missed that bubble by a couple of years. But certainly if you had a baby today and you went and looked at all the milk replacers, they would be talking about these essential fatty acids and then other things on those labels. You'd see it. And so we're starting to see that on some of our dog foods and our cat foods now. And so typically the animal food market follows the human food market. THA, interestingly enough, there's a professor in our department at NC State, Animal Science Department, who was one of the forefront of everybody knowing that DHA is extremely important for both prenatal but also postnatal newborns, making sure that growth is exciting. So certainly an animal science connection there from one of our wonderful scientists at NC State. For those of you that have classes with Dr. Odell, you can that would be the guy. You can't have not too many people in our world smarter than him. So if you have a chance to take classes with him, I certainly recommend that. So a quick little promotion for him. Plus a really nice guy too. So antioxidants are things that we also think about for growth to make sure that the immune system is developing correctly. As you know from other classes, younger animals have a passive immunity from their mother and then colostrum, but then their own immune system has to start working. Especially in dogs, we see that those happen at different stages. Example, Rottweilers, some of our pit type dogs, they have a shorter passive immunity and it takes longer for their active immunity to develop. Therefore, they don't have any immune system for a longer period of time than most other dog breeds do. So for those guys, they shouldn't be vaccinated during those windows, but sometimes you don't know it and it's an accident. So some of those dogs have to be vaccinated more often. And anything you can do to help that immune system develop faster is a wonderful thing for that animal and will keep them safer and healthier. So any of your antioxidants, but also some different minerals here like zinc and selenium that help develop the immune system. There's some other ones that we could suggest here as well, but these are the big ones. Feeding juveniles. Let me go back real quick. Okay. Sorry, I know that I'm confusing you on that one. I wanted to make sure I had a different thing on the slide because I was going to make sure I didn't miss telling you something important, but I do have it there, so I'll get there in a second. Feeding juveniles. So if you look at this big figure over here, and I'm going to try and draw on this graph, and we'll see how this works. You see the Great Dane here, and that's their max weight. But look down here at your Pekingese. Look at that huge difference and how they grow over the first 28 months of their life. So you have a Great Dane that truly, in the first 28 months of his life, he goes from 0 to 120. That's just massive for a dog breed. And then you have this little Cocker Spaniel down here who is 0 to maybe 8 or 9, and that's again very small. Huge difference in feeding this same animal. Humans, yeah, we differ in size as babies, but we're talking 5-6 pounds. So dog breeds differ. I mean, that's just dramatic. So when we talk about feeding one dog breed versus another, look at this range. Again, that's massive. So you have to consider that. That's why when somebody says, is feeding for a breed type important? The normal answer is yes. It just depends on the differences in breeds. So if you're talking about feeding a German Shepherd versus a Setter here, no, I'm not worried about that so much. I wouldn't worry about those two differences. But I do worry about I would worry about Pekingese versus Great Dane, or even German Shepherd versus Great Dane, or German Shepherd versus Pekingese or Cocker. There are things that you want to make sure that you're doing correctly. And cats do not have such dramatic differences in body size. We don't worry about it as much. So growth rates, nutrition, your vitamin D, your calcium, your phosphorus, your magnesium, your manganese, all that working together, it really is important. And I know that you guys know that by now. We've harped on it quite a bit. Calculation of your estimated energy requirements for growing dogs. Because those sizes vary so much, look at how these your ME over here changes. So we're going to look at, so we'll look at the highest one here. So you have, this is your 26-pound newly adult dog, 827 calories per day. That is, you know, I don't, what, 75% of a human, 67% of a human's estimated requirement, your average human. Now look down here at the same age and a different dog. So we're looking at right here. So, whoops, cut that off, sorry. So at the same age, so again, roughly 12 months here, or roughly 12 months there, and you're looking at 1,948 kilocalories for your average large giant breed versus your small medium. And now, again, this is small to medium. So if we said just small, and you did the same calculation, you're going to look at potentially 600 kilocalories a day. If you did just giant over here, you're going to look at, you know, over 2,000 calories a day. That is a huge difference. One, you've got to get those many calories into a growing animal who may be excited and hyper and jumping around. So your food may need to be very nutrient dense for both populations here. But particularly for a tiny little dog who only may eat tiny little bits. So you may have to have even more nutrient dense up here. Either way, I just wanted you to really look at these numbers. You've already looked at how you calculate these numbers, and I believe you guys did this on exam 1. If not, then I guess you guys lucked out because I didn't make you, huh? But either way, you know how to calculate the ME requirement for these animals. There's your calculation up here. But it really is important that you think about how many calories the animal should have going into it. Much smaller difference in cats. There is some difference in cats. There are some large breed cats. Your Maine Coon is the one that most of you probably know the most. But there's also smaller cat breeds. There's the Somali. We are getting into some kind of more unique cat breeds too. There's the Munchkin. That's your kind of like the Dachshund or Basset Hound of cats. And we have like a Sphinx Munchkin cross, so very tiny, hairless, dwarf type cat. So we do have some kind of weird cat breeds, and weird maybe is not the scientific word, but hopefully you guys know what I mean there. But still, the physical growth differences in those breeds are still much smaller than we would see across dogs. Looking here at your kittens, so you have like that 12-month-old cat, you're looking at still about 204 calories a day, so much less than when they're tiny little babies. But then, but still, it's that comparing that to your dogs, it's a big difference. So anyway, again, I'm kind of harping on this a lot, and I think most of you understand the idea of if someone asks you how much their animal eat in a day, don't tell them to look at the back of a bag of food. That's not the best way to do it. Yes, you know that from AFCO that we have to put feeding guidelines on every food, but if you're really trying to help someone and you have the time to do it or you're getting paid to do it, you need to know all those steps about that animal. You need to know their lifestyle, their stage. You need to know how big that dog's going to get, or they're predicted how big that dog's going to get, and you're able to calculate how many calories that animal actually needs in a day, and then you can recommend the food based on that, and then do a portion-controlled little diet study for a couple of weeks where the owner actually is telling you how much the animal is truly eating, if they still act hungry or not, if they're growing, how the body condition's going, and then you and that dog owner can make educated decisions together. So that's kind of why I'm trying to wrap this all up together. You can help people plan diets, and maybe that'll be part of, if you want to go to vet school, that can be part of your veterinary practice where you're actually helping them plan these things. Or maybe you want to be an animal nutritionist and you're helping that. Or maybe you're making foods for Hills or Imes or Purina or whatever, and you're the one who's actually helping set some of these numbers and calculating better diets for certain animals. So nutrient requirements for healthy geriatric animals. Please note that I did say healthy geriatric animals. if your animal has kidney disease or renal disease or cancer or any of that stuff, clearly all of this can change, because then we have to worry about the protein content, the fat content. But this is your healthy geriatric. Energy in general, there's a reduction, because typically the animals slow down. If your animal has not slowed down, it probably isn't really geriatric yet. So you can have a 14-year-old cat who is not geriatric in behavior, and their body probably isn't really starting to process things differently yet. So you can't just go on chronological age to tell you if your animal is geriatric. It's definitely partly their behavior, maybe some blood tests you're getting back from your veterinarian, but more than anything, it's you as the owner who have known that animal its entire life, watching its behavior. Protein in general decreases. Your animal has a decrease in lean body mass that occurs with aging. It results in loss of protein reserves. So your animal needs high quality protein that supplies the essential amino acids, again, for that animal to minimize the loss of that lean body tissue. So usually that means that geriatric animals need a little bit higher protein level, and it may just mean that they need a more digestible protein or a more bioavailable protein, not that they need a higher protein content. So maybe a little bit more expensive diet because you're buying a better protein source. The problem with this is, if your animal isn't really geriatric, but you are feeding them, better protein, they actually might put a little weight on, which makes you have to reduce the energy even more. So again, you have to make sure your animal really needs this kind of diet before you put it on there. Fat, slightly reducing the amount of fat in the diet is often beneficial, but again, you want to make sure you're feeding them good fats. So if you're feeding less fat, make sure you're limiting the fat that we don't need to begin with. You need to make sure you're keeping those EFAs in there. We talked about the value of antioxidants for young animals and their maturing immune function. Well, in true geriatric animals, the immune system actually is starting to break down some. It's not working as good as it used to. So you might want to supplement that as well. And so kind of the same idea. I don't have the zinc and the selenium on here, but clearly they can help. Lutein has been associated with some improvements in immune function. There's even there's some items on the market, and they're probably in your textbook, and I'm not worried about it so much here, but certainly there are items that are associated with potentially helping with memory function for the canines and felines. As you know, dogs and cats can have cognitive dysfunction as they age, much like some humans have. And so there are some agents on the market that are supposedly we can add to diets to help with that memory function of dogs and cats, just like with people. I just caution you to realize that a lot of the studies haven't been done to a huge deal with cats, and most of the studies that are there are with dogs, and I think we need more of them before we make any huge leaps. In the short term, it probably doesn't hurt you to give small doses of things, but it probably isn't a good reason to pay tremendously more for the diet yet either. So just kind of keep in mind that it just really hasn't been proven yet. Arthritis, we know that as animals become geriatric, they can have more severe arthritis, just like we can as humans. So you can have veterinary diets that are prescribed through your veterinarian, depending on how bad the arthritis or hip dysplasia or elbow dysplasia or whatever it is for your animal. Or you can also buy over the counter, and there are, as we've already talked about this semester, there are agents that we put in some of the foods that can help with some of the arthritis type conditions. But again, remember, some of those agents are absorbed better than others, and some of them have to be fed in such high amounts that whatever they add to your food does not matter. It's just a selling gimmick. So again, make sure that if you are buying a food for some of those extra nutritional items, that you're doing the research to make sure your money is going where you think it is. It's just because it has a little bit of chondroitin sulfate in it doesn't mean you shouldn't have chondroitin hydrochlorate, or that there's enough in there for it actually to ever even help your animal. And I picked on those two, not because those are bad things to have in your food, but because those are ones that you do want to research, you do want to know which ones work best, and you'd want to know if it's actually worth the money. So gestation, I'm not harping on this slide much. I'm just giving it here for you to know. So few people actually breed their dogs these days that most of you won't deal with this as much. Gestation is only about 2 months for dogs and for cats, so compared to a human, it's not as big a deal, but the food does need to be highly digestible, energy, nutrient dense. The animals may find things less palatable than they used to if they're kind of feeling a little bit off or sick. You really don't increase the food intake much until the 5th or 6th week, because that's getting into toward the end for them, I guess. Several small meals a day may actually be good during late gestation because they have so many puppies. They're putting so much pressure on the stomach, they can't eat the big meals that they used to. The stomach is not as elastic as it normally is because of all that pressure. So they may have to eat a little bit and let it process and then eat a little bit more. So toward the late gestation, they actually eat 1.25 to 1.5 times maintenance. This highly depends on how many puppies that dog has. If she's only carrying 1 puppy, she probably would not eat any differently. If she's carrying 13, she's going to eat more than this. So again, it really depends on how many puppies she's carrying. Dams shouldn't gain any more than 15 to 20% of their body weight by the end of gestation. Again, for a dog, you're talking about 2 months. That's a huge weight gain and weight loss for them. So you don't want it going too up and down, because that could hurt them. So you want to make sure that you're not letting them just totally overeat because they're pregnant, that you're feeling sorry for them or whatever, and you're going crazy with it. Lactation, again, the mom is providing lots of nutrients for her offspring, and with that, she's got a lot of energy needs, so make sure the food is highly digestible, energy nutrient dense. Again, you want to make sure that you're able to support her through her weight loss, but you're also not letting her lose too much too fast. Clean water, free choice basis. This really, in my book, this should be on every single slide you ever see. Every animal should always have access to clean, fresh water on their own terms. So that said, it is on this slide, but it should really be on every slide. Feed 2 to 3 times maintenance amount during peak lactation. But again, she's going to kind of tell you about that, and watch her body condition score. Free choice feeding. Again, she may still have swelling. She may not be able to get those big meals yet. And then slowly reduce her intake after week 4. You'll see some references that tell you when you are starting to wean the puppies or kittens away from the mother, that you actually starve the mother for about 48 to 72 hours, even taking away water, so that she's starting to dry up, the lactation is going away, the babies are gone, and then you're not feeding her and she'll dry up faster. I am personally not a big fan of that, so if you kind of Google feeding during lactation and late pregnancy, you can see some kind of interesting things that people put out there, but I'm personally a fan of it kind of dwindling away as you monitor the body condition score in that animal instead of cutting them off quick. You would not starve a cat as long as you would a dog, by the way. So when I said 48 to 72, that's typically a recommendation for the female dog, not for cats. But either way, I'm not a huge fan of that technique, but you will see it in other places. Feeding working dogs, feed on a portion-controlled basis so the trainer can regulate what's going on. That kind of makes sense. You want to be able to feed them to make sure that if you know what time your event's going to be, that you can actually make sure you're not feeding right before it or have to feed right after it. You might want to feed more times in a day. So again, you're able to feed your animal appropriately with the time of work they're doing. You need to make sure they have cool water. My caveat to number 1, 2, and 3 is that you take special consideration for any dog who's bloat sensitive or bloat susceptible, or gastric torsion issues. So you don't want them drinking too much after work, too much before work, or certainly eating too much on either side of that. So again, you want to do these things, but you want to never forget your animal is an individual, and you know that animal better than anybody else. So don't overdo it for them. There's definitely endurance athletes, so we have like our sled dogs versus our greyhounds. A whippet, a greyhound, a sport or sprint racing animal, whether it's for a sport you don't agree with or do agree with or whatever, or an endurance athlete type thing, they definitely need different types of foods. Sprint racing, just like you would if you were a human sprint racer, you need more energy burst, so we're talking more carbs here. For our endurance athlete, you need more protein and you need more fat for that. So there's some wonderful charts talking about how they put it in Big Mac percentages. So instead of talking about units of money or time, their unit is Big Macs, and how many Big Macs it takes for a dog to actually run the Iditarod, or how many Big Macs it takes for them to run around a track. And it's kind of a fun chart. And I'll try to find that so I can show it to you guys. I'll just maybe post it on Moodle. You guys will probably think that's interesting. But the big point is endurance versus sprint is very different. The animals are trained differently, and they need to eat different nutrients in order to be able to be successful at what you're getting them to do. Some of your major endurance athletes, like a sled dog, it's almost impossible to get them to eat enough calories. You actually kind of have to break a lot of the rules that we talk about in this class, or some of them feeding them lard, because they're burning so many calories every day. And while we might think about that being cruel to some extent, don't get too far into that, because most of those dogs who have good owners and do the sport right, those dogs love it. It is what they want to do. And some of the same thing for sprint racing. It really depends on who owns those dogs and who's using those dogs. So let's be careful not to wrap them all in the same idea. Some people are wonderful dog owners and some are not. So I think that's the case whether you are a single dog owner or a multi-dog owner. And then the last one is your dog really working? Because we have lots of dogs and people say that they work or they have activities or whatever. Throwing the frisbee in your backyard with your dog is not working. Your dog being a search and rescue dog and it's spending 1 week in a month doing some event is not a working dog. A working dog is a dog who does something truly often. So that could be the dog who runs a lot with a marathon runner, or a dog who works every day with his military owner or his police officer owner, or one that you train very often. So you need to make sure you know, does your dog really work? If it really works, does it need more calories than the average dog? Because I showed you on this chart right here, this is for your average growing dog. So you start to see how these numbers, kind of level off. And as they started to level off, as your animal reaches maturity, you're going to kind of have a set number of calories you need for the average animal on a daily basis. If your dog really works, it's no longer average. It's going to need more calories than that average. And therefore, you need to know, with your animal working, how many calories is it? And that's this point in the back. So that was my lecture for today. A little bit longer than some of the other ones. Sorry about that. But I hope you enjoyed it. And I enjoyed talking to you and giving you the lecture. So getting toward the end of the class, but I hope that everyone's enjoying the material. And as always, please let me know if you have any questions or need any help.